And welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Please use the chat to tell us where you're joining us from. March 11th, 2020, the day everything changed. In the United States, the pandemic future arrived. For other countries, it was already here, China and Italy, or shortly after. The beginning of the new normal. The World Health Organization declared a worldwide pandemic on March 11th, 2020. Work and education at all levels has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Homeschool at all levels and all the implications that accompany it. Work, education, family life, sheltered at home. Today, Gsaec will discuss coach education in the virtual world. Gsaec is the Graduate School Alliance for Education and Coaching. It's an association of institutional, individual, and student members dedicated to strengthening and promoting the discipline and practice of coaching through excellence in graduate level coach education and research. Our mission is to define, advance, and sustain graduate level research and education in coaching globally by establishing standards that shape the discipline of coaching, facilitating research, building a community of leaders, and championing professional coach education. Gsaec values the advancement of academic rigor in coaching research and education, the development and promotion of community among its members, the advancement of integrity in the field of coaching, and continued progression of knowledge creation. We'd like to ask you to mute yourself unless you're asking a question, which we will be doing later in the session, and thank you in advance. And we are going to put up a poll and ask you what your role is in your interest in attending our session today. Faculty, student, independent coach, consultant, other. We'd like to get a feel for who's here. So if you could do that, Shelby, if you could throw up the poll. And while you're filling in your poll, I'd like to tell you about our featured scholars and practitioners who have joined us today. Dr. John Bennett is Professor of Business and Behavioral Science and Director of Graduate Programs at the McColl School of Business, Queens University, North Carolina. He's joining us today from Santa Barbara. John is convinced that I'm needling him about being in such a nice place. Not really, envious. John is the president of Lawton Associates, an executive coaching and consulting practice that he founded in 1997. He's also a past president of Gsaec, and he's a fellow in the Lewin Center and a founding fellow at the Institute of Coaching, affiliated with the McLean Hospital, Harvard Med School. And he serves on the board of trustees at Fielding Graduate University. Michelle Clarke, who is joining us from Chile, is a global leadership and improv coach. She began her career in South Africa in 2005. Michelle coaches leaders in diverse settings such as correctional services, Fortune 500 corporations, universities in remote coastlines of South Africa, mining projects in the northernmost towns of Chile, banking, retail, IT, business owners, and other high-impact individuals, expats, and teams. For Michelle, technology is a gift that offers the opportunity to reach clients across the globe. So it's no surprise that she's been working from her laptop for the past several years with English-speaking clients in Africa, the Americas, Canada, Europe, and Australia. She's currently based in Chile. She loves her work and is deeply gratified to connect with a broad spectrum of courageous people. She has this remarkable opportunity to travel, learn, and grow through the powerful and inspiring modality called coaching. And yes, to teach improv, building radical confidence in individuals and teams. Dr. Terry Maltbia is Associate Professor of Practice in the Department of Organization and Leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University, and Faculty Director of the Columbia Coaching Certification Program, a strategic partnership between the Corporation Learning Solutions Group and the Columbia Business School. He received a Cutting Edge Award from AHRD for research focusing on questioning, listening, and testing assumptions, as communicative coaching competencies and was recognized by Thinkers 50 and Marshall Goldsmith #1 in coach education during the 2019 Top Global Honors. Prior to joining the faculty at Columbia, Terry spent 25 years in corporate and consulting in diverse roles from field sales, regional sales management, marketing, personnel development, to leading global leadership and organizational effectiveness functions. And I am thrilled to welcome them and to say that it has been a lot of fun planning this workshop with them. And so to begin, we've asked Terry to kick off our session and share with us the story of the Columbia Coaching Program that was due to launch its next cohort in April 2020. Terry?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Certainly a pleasure to be here. One of the things that has changed is our greetings now that we're on the virtual environment. So I used to say good morning or wherever it was, and now I have to remember good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And that is certainly true. So thank you. I'm going to start my clock because anyone who knows me knows that time is not my friend. I'm not very good at it. So I have 13 minutes and I'm going to stick to it. And thus the slides can actually give you more information that I can tell you. So as Charline mentioned, we've had a coaching program since 2007, and it was designed to be residential. And then, of course, in March, everything changed, and the entire university, which prior to that had been about 90% face-to-face on campus, all of a sudden had to do what we called emergency virtual. We literally had 2 days to take what we used to do for many of them decades to this new format. And so that's the story that we're going to share. Charline gave us some questions to think about, and I'm just going to highlight some of the ones that I think I'm going to address. One is, how do you maximize effectiveness teaching, I added facilitating, and a coach curriculum in this new virtual world? What are ways that we can actually maximize engagement in this environment? I would say everything was a challenge starting from day one, so I think that's going to be embedded in this story, surely. I'll say a little bit about how one uses Zoom functions and other tools, and I may not talk about it explicitly during the case, but I'm sure when we get into our discussion and conversations, we'll talk about, based on these lessons learned, what is it going to look like in the future? So those are some things that we're going to adjust. Just a really quick context. Again, we launched the program in 2007. We actually have 3 segments, or we used to start with what we call a front-end residential coaching intensive, Sunday through Friday, 42 contact hours. We did 1 week for externals. We did another week for internals. The next segment of the program, that was open enrollment. The next is people apply, went through our field-based practicum. That was 8 months, technology enabled. So the good news is, unlike the university, at least we had some experience using Zoom prior to our emergency event. And then the program wraps up with another, what we call an advanced residential intensive, which was also a week. And then our participants have 2 months to complete all their certification documentation and then credentialing. We have typically done 2 cohorts a year annually. And so to date, we've had over 1,300 complete our open enrollment program, over 700, and really importantly, about 30 to 40% because of this construction had been outside of the US. So when we got hit with COVID-19, given all the other things that were happening, we knew we were not ready to convert 1 week of a residential program immediately to virtual, at least do a good job. We didn't believe that our non-executive education market would actually tolerate us not being very well informed. And so we took some time to figure out what we were doing. So we didn't launch this virtual program until the fall of 2020. Some things we wanted to do in the redesign is maintain our global reach. So that certainly was a challenge, because in addition to just simply having jet lag, if you came to the US, it's one thing when you have people, for example, in the fall, we had participants calling in from as far west in California to China. So you see the time zones, and that was really a challenge. And I'll talk a little bit about how we manage that. We did survey potential participants for our spring and then what became our fall intake about their thoughts. And many of us told us that they liked the intensive 42 contact hours, lots of time to apply it in a practicum, and then the intensity. They really did not want us to spread out that 1 week session into multiple weeks. And so that just really amplified that challenge. Just really quickly, the program is based on 3 foundations: mindset, competencies, and process. And then we take it from there. And so we implemented 10 design inputs. The first 5 are things that any adult educator or facilitator knows about: adult learning principles, foundation and higher order flow, the developmentally sequencing your learning, defined design process, leveraging the the participant's experience for learner engagement, and then employ a modular format, just have a really clear structure. So our task was, how do we bring that work and leverage it? And what are some of the things that were different in a virtual environment? But what was unique are these principles 6 through 10 that really operated specifically in this new environment. I'll start with 7, which was basically, there's a bunch of tools. And what we discovered early on is the tools can actually take over the learning. So we wanted to be very deliberate about selecting tools for the first round and add as we went to develop some proficiency. Developmentally sequencing a range of video production styles, because we realized that asynchronous was going to become a significant part of what we were doing. We also wanted to be really intentional based on the research that we were discovering about activity, and there's 3 levels that we discovered, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then what was really new to us was asynchronous learning, so we wanted to look for best and promising practices, and then we added this element which we call regional core groups to deal with some of the time differences. So again, we'll share the slides after the session. So you all know this, learning is a transformation that takes place over time, being explicit about action and reflection, connecting to what learners find important, learning with others, and having a learning environment challenges for nothing surprising there. When we went into the new environment, we wanted to say, when we looked at those adult learning principles, what are some adult learning principles that we really needed to focus on in this new environment? And 4 really stood out. This notion of multimedia principle, and you see the 2 subsets there, but the big idea is audios and visuals, and being really intentional about those 2 elements. This notion of coherence, and really what it allowed us to do is be really focused. In this experience, what I learned is how little attention I actually paid to what was essential, and the asynchronous environment really required that we do that. Segmenting principles, using visuals and highlighting people where you are, and then segmenting principles. So we really looked at the adult learning principles that we were very familiar with through the lens of these multimedia learning practices. Again, every module foundation, the first 3, what are you teaching them? How do they internalize it? How do they apply it? We did that early on. As we keep layering, then we add analysis to it. And then as the program moves in, move forward, again, have a specific design process, link on their experience. So now I'm going to zero in on what was new and what was important in my last 7 minutes or so. And so don't get wrapped up, because I know you can't see this, but this is what our entire week looked like. But basically what you see, this is the module structure. This wouldn't matter whether it was our front-end intensive or the back-end intensive. The architecture was always the same. We started at 3 o'clock. As you can see, we took the break in the morning, always at the same time. We had lunch always at the same time. We took our afternoon break always at the same time. We had dinner at the same time. Whenever you have, what we discovered through these principles is whenever you have complexity, if you can create stability and structure, as the week went on, people really knew what to expect, and what's inside doesn't matter. But what we know is that everything was synchronous. Everyone was there. So this is what we used to do. What we shift to, and again, the details aren't as important, but what you see is we did the same thing all week. We actually did some research and looked at where our people were coming from and time zones for the last decade. And so we knew that there would be a stable core of people where these hours would work. And we also knew that there would be a stable core, or there would be some people where the hours wouldn't work. It was also clear, the business school did research for us that said there's really only 2 hours in the day, one early in the US and one afternoon that works globally. So really 2 hours. If you jump to 4 hours, that is fewer people. And if you go to 6, which we did, we pushed the envelope, it means that's even going to be fewer people than it would be ideally for. So if you look at what is our mornings, you saw that we had synchronous sessions starting on Monday. I'll come back to what's in the Go. And then if you look at the green on the bottom, you see that we also had synchronous sessions throughout the week and the time for those. What was new is what some people in the education world call the flipped classroom. And so what we actually did through a combination of asynchronous sessions and what we call regional core groups, really took what used to be more content focused. And so if you look at the 1442 contact hours that used to be all synchronous, in this new format, 7 hours were synchronous. So all the content was delivered in those 7 asynchronous sessions, which you see in the Go. And then we had these regional core groups that did a blend. So I'm going to talk about one principle, which has to do with level of interactivity, level 1, level 2, and level 3, and show how that really was operationalized. That just tells you a little bit about norms. Tools really, again, you can get overwhelmed by this, but what we discovered is there's really 3 classes of tools. There's tools about instructional talk. We call it content oriented. We were using Canvas forever, and we use Zoom, and so that wasn't new. There's some other tools that we are exploring for the future. Remember, developmentally sequence, start with a small number of tools that you can use and add it as you go. Because visuals are so important, we identified some resources to make sure that we had set visuals. Interactive talks, we use PlayPosit for our what we call our asynchronous sessions, and I'll talk about that really quick in a moment. And then activities. We happen to start off with Padlet and Mentimeter. Padlet is a sort of a poster board kind of activity, and Mentimeter is a wonderful way to do a wide variety of interactive tools embedded into your PowerPoint, and then there's some others. So in my last few minutes, let me just talk about some things that we discovered that were really important. So the video production style, we used the first 4. We started with talking heads, really easy. And then PowerPoint with voiceover, step ahead. And then picture in a picture, another step ahead. And then text overlay. And so these are a bit more complex. And then the last 2 are even the most complex, which is more interactivity with the video. So we didn't try to do the higher order stuff first. We started basic and then developed as our skill set improved and time zones. So I think this was probably the most instructive. So I'll leave here, which was level 1 kinds of activities for primarily asynchronous work, level 2 kind of moderate level, and level 3. And so level 1, everyone knows PowerPoint. And so you can combine PowerPoint with some voiceover, combines Screencast-O-Matic, where you add webcam a little more easily and then explain everything, allows you to annotate as you're doing it. So developmentally sequenced video production. Level 2, PlayPosit. We use 2 of them, PlayPosit and VoiceThread. PlayPosit was what we use for asynchronous. And so what you can do is actually have your slides and your voice and or video and strategically pause. So all of our asynchronous sessions were an hour. And in that hour, the content was no more than 2 to 3 minutes at a time. And then the video would pause. People would either reflect, read, do some type of activity. At the end of that asynchronous session, there was a knowledge check, and the participants got immediate feedback. So that's one way we used it. VoiceThread is a process where people are watching a video, and then they can pause the video and actually chat and add. So that's a lot more interactive than simply watching someone talk or watching someone talk and pause. So again, level 2. And then level 3 has to do with this notion of articulate. So I think I'm about at my time. And so the way I'll end, and when you see the slides, we have some concrete examples of level 1, some concrete examples of level 2. All of these things we actually used. And as you notice, we don't have a lot at level 3 because we're moving ourselves there. So with that, I will pause, and when we have questions, I'm looking forward to your discoveries. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Terry.
Back to you.
It's amazing how intentionality, which has a feeling of being very organic in the moment, can have so much structured support behind it to make it happen so well. So thank you for sharing that with us. And there will be questions, and please place your questions in the chat box, and we will have a breakout later where we'll have more opportunity for questions. We're all fascinated and involved with the coaching world, and we know one of the absolutely elemental skills is questions, and that's what we'll be doing. I'd like to segue now to Michelle Clarke. Michelle will begin by sharing her fascinating story as the head tutor on an online coaching program in South Africa.
Thank you, Charline, and thank you, Terry. That was so interesting how quickly you had to move your product online. The difference with the work I do, and this work is done with the University of Cape Town and a startup in Cape Town called Get Smarter. They build short courses that people can access online at affordable prices. And maybe about 8 years ago, a colleague of mine developed a short course in coaching that was built, designed, and executed fully in the online space using some of the things Terry has shared, the asynchronous learning, the videos, and so forth. When about 4 years ago, the course was due for upgrade, and the university was given my name. In fact, the original writer of the material offered them my name. And they contacted me. At the time, I was in the beautiful city of Chicago. And they said, Michelle, we would love for you to come and be the head tutor on this online course. When are you coming back to South Africa? And I said, well, actually, I live in Chile now. So after Chicago, I'm going to be going back to South Africa. After Chicago, I'm going back to Chile. And they said, oh, well, sorry about that then. We can't deal with you because we need to have a South African doing this. So I was declined the position. Sad for me. They contacted me about 3 or 4 months later, and they said, your name has still been given to us that you really should do this work with us. And when are you coming back to South Africa? And I said, I'm not. But this is an online course. I, at that time, was doing all of my coaching work online. So my question to them was, if this is a fully online course, why can your head tutor not be fully online too? And they did agree to that. So that was exciting. Our course is different to Terry's. It's a short course. It's only 12 weeks long. And in that time, the students only meet me live, as you're now seeing me, 4 times. So there's 4 hours of contact time with the head tutor. They meet me often in videos that were, I did eventually go to Cape Town. I went in to Get Smarter Studio. We created a bunch of videos. And we included in that videos of some of my colleagues who live around the world. And those were shot all virtually. So I have now been working in this project for the past 3 years. I love it. We take about 300 students a year through the short course. Most of our student body is in South Africa because the university is in South Africa. But we do have a number of students who have gone through the course not in South Africa, and I'm excited that some of them are actually on the call today. I wanted to also talk about engagement in the online space. And one of the reasons why I was in Chicago at the time when I told you the story is I was at the IO Theatre's 5-week improv intensive. I'm an improviser and an improv teacher, and I had gone there to collect some additional skills. And the only thing that had stopped me from keeping my work 100% in the cloud, because I coach fully, I call it in the cloud, But improv is a very physical type of engagement, and I didn't know how I was going to get from the ground to the cloud. And a great pleasure, I was in Prague at the end of 2019, where the ICF had their Converge conference, and I delivered an improv workshop. I was very fortunate to have in that class 3 ladies from Malaysia, 3 coaches from Malaysia. And when Corona came swooping down on the world, it was, and I'm sure it's pretty soon coming out, right? The ICF Coaching Week. And these coaches from Malaysia contacted me to say, Michelle, can you do an improv workshop online? One of the grounding fundamental rules of improv is you say yes. So I said, yes, of course I can do that online. And then I went about learning, how do we do this online? How can we learn how to engage people in acting type of environment, and making things up spontaneously together? So the whole of last year was a huge learning curve for me. And I'm thrilled now that I am doing improv online. The great joy for me is that I'm able to, where before I was able to go to an events hall and invite people who lived in Santiago to do improv online with me, I now can invite people from South Africa and India and Europe and the USA. So that's been a great pleasure. I think for me, and I believe this for any educator in the online space, our currency is energy. That is how we engage our audience. Energy is the critical thing, and it's for the facilitator to bring that energy in that invites others to be freer in this space. I have not been watching my clock, Charline, so I'm not sure how deep I'm into my time zone here. And if possible, I'd love to invest 2 or 3 minutes doing an improv exercise with us. I can do that. Great. So I would love everybody who has your camera on. You are welcome to sit it out, or you're welcome to join in. But if you have your camera on, I'd like you to please copy what I'm about to do. So I'd like you to do this. This is called position number 1. So everybody get into position number 1. Amazing. This is position number 2. So can everybody get into position number 2? Great. And this is position number 3. So if everyone can get into position number 3. So just to remind ourselves, please, position number 1, position number 2, and position number 3, as far as your hands can reach. So what we're going to do now is we're all going to start in position number 1. And anybody at any time can choose to move to position 2 or 3, and in no particular order. So I want you to be quite, and this is another very important skill for online work, I want you to be observing our boxes, and as soon as you see somebody move position, I want you to move position again. If you choose then to move position, do it again. So just watch what's going on your screen, and let's see if we can all find our positions. Oh, and that's a chicken in my bag. Fantastic. Great. You are all going to come and join my next Improv 101 class online. That's fantastic. And so I think I'll leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions, but I think for me, the most important message I want to offer is your energy is absolutely critical for how you engage online.
Thank you, Michelle. We didn't expect to have so much energy coming from us into the screen, so we really appreciate that. And now we have an opportunity to speak with John Bennett. And John, if you notice, we've been talking about coach education from the perspective of administration, as well as faculty perspectives. And as you and I talked yesterday, there's some other perspectives that you'd like to bring to the conversation. So perfect segue. You're still on mute, John. Okay.
Yeah, well, some would say I probably should be on mute, but that's a different story. It's great to be with all of you, and to see Gsaec taking such a positive role around educating coaches and offering this kind of program. So those of you that are not as involved with Gsaec, I would encourage you to consider ways to be involved in the work that's going on in a community of educators focused on how to do this work and how to do it well. So as I think about our journey, so I'm at Queen's University of Charlotte in the business school, and like all of you, experienced some degree of disruption in mid-March. Totally unexpected. In fact, it was like, wow, what's happening here? And I remember leaving my office and looking back, turning back into my office and thinking, have I got everything that I need through the rest of the year? Thinking that perhaps I would need to be off campus until January. Well, who would have imagined that I'm still working remotely? And in fact, working remotely to the extent of deciding, well, if I can work remotely, why do I even need to be where I normally would be? And so we loaded up and are spending some time in California in a way that allows us to do exactly what we're talking about today, and that is the use of technology. And technology for me is the how. And as we were pivoting, our pivot involved a hiatus on campus. We took a 5-day break. The university said no instruction for 5 days. This will give us a chance to shift. I personally was teaching a course in the spring term that had to be moved normally from a weekend intensive into an online experience. Now, what we experienced was that many of our faculty members were unfamiliar with the technologies, the basic technologies of running Zoom or even being on a Zoom call or having a conference call and participating in those kinds of things. And so what we think of as normal for many of us and experience for many of us was foreign to some. I also realized very quickly that our students had a variety of knowledge about technology and how that they could use technology as a learning tool. I've taught a class on interpersonal and group dynamics for many years, and I've required students to have at least 2 of their project team meetings in a virtual format, because I realized that some students didn't have a lot of experience doing that. Well, a pandemic like this and moving to a complete virtual platform certainly challenged both our faculty and our students. So one of the things that we did was to begin offering some sessions for our faculty in addition to our university teaching excellence resources, but within the business school to offer a forum for faculty to come and share leading practices, best practices, challenges that they were having so that we could learn from each other. And that was an extremely valuable tool for us. Now, let me add to this that in the middle of all of that we're going through in the pandemic, the university had made a decision to change our learning management system. We'd been using an open source platform, Moodle, for many years. And in the midst of the pandemic, we also had to shift to Canvas. So fortunately, we were able to delay some of that until January. But what it did do is it meant that we had that ramp up of a new way of teaching. Now, we can look at that and say, well, that was a really horrible thing to have happen. On the other hand, what it did was it enabled us to think more creatively about how we teach. So Terry offered some a variety of technologies, and all of those were the kinds of things that we needed to deal with and we needed to incorporate. But when we moved to a new learning management system, it allowed us also to think about how we were structuring courses. So in our coaching program, and we offer a graduate certificate program that is a non-degree, but it's graduate credits. We also offer courses within our MBA and our Master's in Talent and Organization Development, a concentration in executive coaching. So we have a combination of students who are non-degree graduate course students, as well as those that are seeking a graduate degree. So that's a combination. In addition, we offer a lot of executive education, as many business schools do. And so we were also having to pivot how we teach coaching in that format as well. So people who would normally have come to our campus for anywhere from 1 day to maybe 10 or 12 days of leadership development. Sometimes we've run programs that are 1 day focused solely on coaching skills for managers, up to 8 days of those same kind of skills. So what we had to face was, how do we continue to teach in a high quality manner in a new how? And I think of technology as the how. So what were those tools, and how did we share those tools, and how do we ramp those tools up? And that continues to be our evolution. And I think Terry gave a wonderful example of how at Columbia they have moved to more and more sophisticated technology, not because it's sophisticated, but because it adds value to the learning experience. Now, we've found some lessons here that I want to share, and then I'm going to turn back to Charline and see if there's a question that she would ask, that she would prompt based on all that I've shared as well as others. So a couple of things. One is the idea that we think about in teaching coaching, moving from being a novice to being a master. And that doesn't happen overnight. As we know, when we're educating coaches, they start out often not even knowing what coaching really is, all the way up to hopefully developing a level of skill that demonstrates mastery. What we had faculty who had developed a high degree of confidence and competence at a mastery level of teaching in a traditional classroom experience. And so for people who are knowledgeable and who are very good at what they do, suddenly we place them in a role of being a novice. I think one of our awarenesses that came out of this, a lesson, was we had to embrace our faculty where our faculty were. We had to realize that they were not all at the same place, that their learning and experience was different. The other piece of that was to realize that our students were also going through that. Now, I'll tell you a personal experience. I was talking with a student. I needed to get a little help with something, and I called a student one day who happens to have a big job in a very large healthcare system. And I said, "So how are you doing?" And he said, "Well, Dr. Bennett, it's really rough." He said, "My wife is a teacher, and so she is on Zoom 7 hours a day. She has to be on 7 hours a day with her students. We have two kids at home. We're trying to manage them and their school. I'm trying to do my job, and I'm also in graduate school taking 2 courses." I said, "Holy cow, how are you doing? How are you doing all this?" He said, "Well, it's been tough." He said, "But let me add something to that. Our oldest daughter is in a Spanish immersion program and goes into a Spanish program 2 days a week. I don't know Spanish. I took French in high school. So here we are struggling with how to take care of ourselves, our families, and continue our work, our livelihood, and at the same time, be a graduate student." That's a challenge that I don't think any of us have ever experienced in the same way. We also, had to realize that we had students who were not only getting COVID, dealing with those issues, but we also had students who were dealing with family members and neighbors and people that they cared about, and the distance from their support systems was also critically important to impacting their learning. So let me pause there. Charline, what have you heard that we talked about, just asking a question as a follow-up and then moving into the next piece of the program. So do you have a question for me?
We did talk about that. And I was thinking, as the three of you were talking, and we're talking about how we came into this experience and what we're doing now in the experience. And the thing I've been thinking about is, how do we envision coaching education in the future after the pandemic? Not going back, because we're not going back, we're going into the future. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
That sounds like a song, Into the Future, right? What's that line? I think that we talk about going into a new normal. I actually don't, or back to a normal. I don't think we're going to go back. I think the pendulum has swung. Universities have developed competence that we never imagined having at this point. It's forced us into some creativity. It's forced us into adaptation. And I think we're realizing that we can do the job in new and different ways. This week, I was informed there's some trending going across the country. Two things were happening, and this is primarily undergraduate students, but one is that there are more students doing delays of their admissions than we normally would have. This is across the country, across the U.S. And so people are not, they may be admitted to college, but they're taking a year to wait, more of that than normal, than has been in the past. The second piece that was really interesting to me was more people are looking out, not paying attention to the geographic location of the school in relationship to where home is. So in the past, what we've seen is college students will often pay attention to being relatively close to home, or for many of us, it's how far away from home could we get. But the idea of geographic location, and I think that's Michelle had that same point when she's talking about being able to work from Chile and then have a client group in South Africa. Terry talked about international students. One of the things we faced was we had students who were from outside the U.S. that just at the beginning of COVID exited the country and then couldn't get back in. And we're having to take classes that we had scheduled. A normal schedule might be at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And they were having to figure out what that meant for them, sometimes, midnight in their part of the world. So I think what we've realized, and I think the short answer to that, Charline, from my perspective, is that things are different and they're not going to go back. Many things will not go back. I think what we're finding is that we can do this work and maintain the high quality as well as the relational piece. And I think the more we can learn to be relational in a virtual environment, the easier it will be for us to teach skills like coaching. And how do we learn to read body language? How do we manage group discussions? How do we engage people in the learning process? So the technologies are emerging and our ability to use them is certainly emerging. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, John. Michelle, would you like to add to that?
Only to say I think that was an excellently and eloquently put together piece. And I'm also reading that simultaneously with some of the comments that are going into the chat. And I think it feels like we are aligned. We have learned additional skills. And I think we're seeing some of the benefits as well, the cost benefits of not traveling. So I run a group in Facebook for coaches. This morning I asked, where are you in your coaching? Face-to-face, or are things opening up and you're going back online? Face-to-face online. And most people are saying, I am so happy now that I have learned this online skill that this is where I wish to stay.
Thank you. Terry, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there are multiple realities. I think in the early stages of the pandemic, because we were such a residence-based, on-campus-based university, that we thought, wow, the pendulum is going to swing and it's going to be 100%, et cetera. We've been canvassing not only our existing students, but prospective students, and we're hearing multiple realities. We're hearing that some of them, and the percentages are about 50-50. We're hearing that some of them like the virtual world, but we're hearing a number of them, one of the major reasons why they chose the university, in addition to the school, was the location, and wanted to experience that. We're also hearing from students who, this surprised me because I remember walking around the campus of Columbia and I would see students right next to each other, not talking to each other, but they actually were. They just were using their devices, which I thought was strange. Like, why would you text each other and you're like sitting right next to each other? Yet what I'm hearing from that demographic is what they realized they missed, particularly the students in the early part of the semester where we had started face-to-face and then went virtual, that they didn't realize the impact of the informal learning. The stuff that happened during breaks, going to the restaurant, et cetera. So I don't think we're going to go back, and I don't think it's an either or. Actually, I think we are now in a more complex delivery environment because I think we have to learn how to do multiple modalities. We just got a survey asking us as faculty, kind of your range of preferences, virtual, on campus, or blended. And the part meaning not blend it sequentially, but blend it at the same time, meaning having people face-to-face and virtual. And I got the sort of face-to-face or virtual thing down, but I'm trying to wrap my head around virtual and face-to-face at the same time. I'm not quite there yet. Yet I think the good news is I wasn't 100% virtual either. And the shift forced me to learn how to do it and embrace it.
Great, thank
Terry,
you,
that's
Terry.
I was just going to add, Terry, that prompted me. One of the things that we're dealing with the same issue, and as we've brought students back to campus, some faculty members were able to return and teach, and some students wanted to be on campus, but we also had to accommodate students who couldn't. And so with, OWL cameras in classrooms that track the speaker and those kind of things, we've been able to have people in both environments. So I think the point being that the range of options and the mixture of options, of modalities is, I think, probably what we're going to be facing in the near future is not an either or, as Terry said, but an and both. And both might be options within a single program to have both virtual and in person, or having synchronous and asynchronous, and a combination of those for students. So.
Hey, John.
And John, I would add that this is an incredible opportunity, thinking about intentionality and inclusion, to have our students involved in the design process. You've been talking about, preferences that they've been mentioning, but have them involved in the design of what we're doing, involved in their learning design. So it's a great opportunity as well. Right now, we would like to break you out into small groups so that you can discuss two things. What resonated with you so far in the conversation that we've had? And is there a question that you'd like to bring back to the group and put it in chat when you come back? As much as possible, we'll try to answer questions now, but if we can't get to them, we will get to them. I've been following chat. There's some terrific questions in there, and we will be circling back in about a week with what's in the chat and as many responses as we can. So Shelby, I think you're managing the process of sending us to the breakout rooms, and we'll be in those rooms for about 5 minutes, and Shelby will give you a warning of about a minute left. Right? So thanks a lot, and we'll see you back in about 5 minutes. Welcome back. We hope you had a good, rich discussion. If you could take an opportunity to put your resonating comment as well as question in the chat box, we would appreciate it. We'll try to get to some of them right now. But to segue back into this meeting, one of the participants, Vicky Kashkensko, brought up a question that we've been struggling with and talking about, and that is, here we are teaching in the virtual environment, and you're learning how to be a coach in the virtual environment, getting your experience here. What happens when you move back to face-to-face, or have the opportunity to be face-to-face, and you've learned primarily or exclusively in the virtual environment? John, did you want to start?
Well, it's the challenge I think we're all facing, or one of the challenges that we're facing, and it's simply put, we have taught people for years and know how to teach people in person. However, I'll tell you, I learned coaching in a purely on phone technology many years ago, and had not learned it. So it was an auditory process with a manual versus anything that was in Zoom. So somehow, that worked. And now we're in this new environment of teaching people virtually. And then the question is, how do we then also teach them to interface in person with people? And at the same time, how have we as educators needed to adopt new ways of teaching, new kinds of learning activities? So when we think about the things that we have used in person, breakout groups in ways that perhaps have worked very well, and we can kind of monitor those as we go along. So how do we do that, and how do we learn these kinds of new technologies in this virtual environment? How do we adapt what we've done? And I think Terry gave us a wonderful laundry list of the kinds of technologies that can support us. But beyond the bits and bytes kind of technology, what are those tools that we use, those processes that we use as faculty to teach people. So I don't have the answer to that. I'm really intrigued by the question and think it's an opportunity, maybe a pioneering front line here for us to think about as educators of coaches.
You know, John, I think this question actually amplifies what we already know about COVID-19, which is it made very explicit and apparent some dynamics that were already happening. And I think you just highlighted it. You know, coaching programs for decades have been teaching via phone and not even Zoom. In fact, the first probably 10 years or so of the coaching industry started purely phone. And yet a lot of the coaching they were doing at this. So that dynamic has always been in place. I think what happened is COVID-19 has actually amplified and brought to the focus a lot of gaps that we weren't paying attention to.
Right.
Because it's really not a new question. It feels like a new question.
Yeah.
It's just not one that we paid attention to.
That's right.
Because in fact, I was a little surprised when I first entered this space that so much of the training coming from a sales training background, which was very relational and face-to-face and so on, I was surprised that with coaching being such a human interaction modality, that so much was done via the phone. So that surprised me. And yet it was the common modality when I entered.
Yeah. And I think the other piece that we need to be conscious of is how does this technology in any way advantage or disadvantage any of our learners? And in realizing, I'll tell you, I've been part of a program for the last 6 months that I'm a student in. And one of the things that I've realized is that often they're giving instructions verbally. And, you know, as we do, we kind of roll them off and we tell what's going on. And then there's an expectation to work in a breakout room and discuss something. And I'm going, now, what was it exactly that they said? But what's not happening is they're not putting the instructions in the chat. They're not giving me the visual cue for those instructions. They're not giving me ahead of time what the material is. And so I think about that in terms of learning styles that we need to find ways of adapting to meet those needs. And realizing that our students have a variety of diversity, including cultural diversity and economic diversity that may or may not make technologies available, information literacy diversity, which is becoming more and more important to us as we operate in this virtual world also. So,
I agree. One other question, we'll see how many more we have, but one of them comes up with some of the things we've been talking about, and it's attention that we need to spend to intentional design. What are some of the activities that we can create? Some of the skill building of being in the moment. Michelle, maybe you can speak with this. And what are some good practices?
Thank you, Charline. I've just had that moment that John was talking about where I heard you ask 3 questions and I don't remember the first one.
That's okay. Let me, what interactional activities need to intentionally be architected by the faculty or perhaps together with the students? And what are some good practices?
I think we have to be very intentional in our design. We have to be very intentional in our engagement design because we are competing with screen time now. Now everybody's working online, people are meeting their own teams online, and then they come online into our space. We need to know how to make them present. For me, I use games, activities, a lot of my improv experience. I believe we need to move away from teaching to be facilitative. That the dimensionality of a teacher lecturing and I listen and absorb, I don't think we've got anybody's attention span for long enough because of the online space. So I think we need to be more facilitative. We throw out a bit of information and we facilitate conversation, or we facilitate an exercise that brings that learning point to bear. So that would be where I would take it, that we not only enhance our online skills, our tech skills, but our facilitation skills as well.
I think that's terrific, Michelle. I was in a session yesterday with someone from Stanford who does a lot of neuroscience work and design work and meetings and facilitation. And he said that there's a rule of thumb that you don't plan any activity that's longer than the age of the participant. And I was thinking, I couldn't stand at my age to listen to this for that long. But he was talking about children, kindergarten and other children. But to your point, being conscious of that interaction. John, Terry?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
John.
No.
Please.
Well, I don't know that. I think the design piece, I think we have to change more often. I think another piece is that as we move into this virtual environment, one of the things our faculty have experienced, and I've certainly experienced, is there's a need to do more planning and more preparation, it seems like, in this environment. The options, and what I've been struggling with is that because of the novice nature of my skill set. As I develop more competence and confidence, as I move toward mastery as a faculty member teaching in a virtual environment, will my ability to improv, Michelle, to do that kind of in the moment innovation, will it increase as my ability to work with the tools and technology and the comfort zone? Because what happens is that so often in the classroom, while we have a plan, we're often adjusting in the moment. And what our faculty have said is this requires a lot more work. It requires a lot more planning. And I'm wondering if that will get easier as we do more of it. I think so, as our confidence increases as well. Yeah.
Well, this may sound like a matter of semantics, but I don't think it is. I think that what has happened is we used to talk about online learning, and we're now talking about virtual learning. And I think something has shifted because so there's a perception in the marketplace, and I think this builds on your point, John. There's a perception in the marketplace that online learning should be less expensive than face-to-face. And I think part of it is because it was online, because it was mainly asynchronous. And so on. And I think what has happened is as, quote, more traditional face-to-face facilitators moved to online, they brought a lot more of that virtual. So for us, it does take more time. It actually is more expensive. For the same week, it is more expensive to do virtually well. And I think that's the key element. It's very easy, I have discovered, to do a very solid online asynchronous kind of thing. That's easy. But virtual is much more than that. And I think that's what, so it sounds like semantics, but I really don't.
No,
I think
very
the
big.
industry is going to shift as a result of this discovery.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Terry, because I've been scrolling through the questions, and there are several questions about what institutions are going to do about looking at the pricing, because they are not face-to-face and you're in this virtual space. And there is that sense of, maybe I was paying X amount for tuition, but I was paying to be in a room and to be with people and everything else. But it's a great segue, Terry, with what you just brought up of being able to build the infrastructure. But are we spending enough time teaching people how to really use that infrastructure? Not just the students, the faculty, but the students.
Well, I also think it means that as educators, whether institution or educator, I mean, here's one of my lessons learned. Initially, we had delayed our spring intake and the fall intake. So a number of those people who were in the spring were going to the fall, and everyone had the same question. This is going to be a lot less expensive, right? Right? And I was discovering that, wow, this is actually taking a lot more time to do right. So I think we as educators actually have to educate the market about the difference. Like all online education and training is not the same. So if you want asynchronous, we can give that to you at a great price. But if you want high interactivity, Because here's the deal. In a classroom, I didn't always need a GA, a graduate, but I need a production person in an online environment because I can't track the texting and this and that. And so it's actually more, the difference in price is travel and lodging. But in terms of, so for the individual, it could be the same or less. But basically, our pricing strategy is it was residential. We took off the residential and the rest of it was the same.
Yeah, I think a good point about that is what's the value proposition? And we haven't done a good job at describing that, or do we even know it? Have we thought about it? Coming together today and talking about this, we're starting to think about it as we thought about our teaching styles as well as how we facilitate a class. But to come back to that, how can we communicate our value proposition? How do we just define and measure success in remote coaching education?
So Charline, I want to take us back to something, and that is, Gsaec is fundamentally about educating coaches. And I would make a clear distinction in both the modality and what can be done in this kind of commodity of training.
Right.
And make a distinction about training and educating. And for me, a difference of that is that we want people in an educational environment to understand the theory behind the practice and know how to do the practice as well. Yeah. So it's theory and practice. Often what we do in training is simply teach the skill set or a skill set that can be applied uniformly if the conditions are right. So training often doesn't get to the point of, well, what happens if the rules don't work? And that's that level of mastery that we move toward as educators. And so as we think about the work that Gsaec has set out to do over the years, it is about focusing on education. And so one of the value differences is, we can make a commodity out of training and probably do that effectively in an online asynchronous environment. I don't know about skill development, but at least the knowledge piece. What can we do in terms of education? It's a different level. And I think what we have to continually do is talk about, we're educating coaches. We're not training coaches.
That's right.
And that's a different proposition. And we do that in a different way.
John, I'll share an observation that our Office of Digital Learning shared with me. And they said, even within the coaching field, even in the education field, they noticed the difference between the instructors who actually understood learning. Because just because you're in a university doesn't mean you understand learning. So
that's right.
That's something that our Office of Digital Learning made clear.
Yes.
They said, with the traditional teachers coming to us and they just want to know how to do what they did in now this virtual environment. They said, those of you who understand learning will actually describe what you want to happen and ask us what tools can help us get there. See, I think that's very different. And I think that's also very important.
Sure. Well, I mean, most university professors have never had an education course. So that's we have to face a reality. Now, that might not be true at Teachers College with the name Teachers College in it, Terry, but I know for most faculty, that's the case. And now we throw on a complexity. And I'm reminded Michelle's comment, or I think Michelle or maybe Charlene's comment earlier, reminded me of one of our more senior faculty a number of years ago, kind of the classic university professor type. You can put your imagination around that in a way that was very knowledgeable, expert in his field, kind of a curmudgeon of a guy. And when I first met him, I said something, he was on his way to class. It's, what are you going to teach? And he kind of mumbled and he said, well, I don't teach. I went, really? And he said, yeah, I don't teach. I facilitate learning. And that's the point I think we have to continue to remind ourselves, is that adults learn through experience, and we have to provide them with the container to have that experience in which they can reflect and learn. And
I would agree with you, John. And I think one of the other strengths of what we do in coaching education is teach the value of reflection and building that in, whether it's reflection in our own learning, reflection time with our clients build reflection time for what did we just learn? And I go back to my pharma days when we would have a after action review and everyone wanted to spend time on what we didn't do right. And we shifted the discussion to what did we do right to do more of it, because you just assume these things happen. And I think with reflection and encouraging that, whether it's in the classroom, in the work that we assign, the experiences, and teaching our coaches how to build that capacity for their clients.
This is another comment that might sound like a matter of semantics, but I don't think it is. Often I hear in some ways a dichotomy between training and education. I think what they both have in common is learning. Mm-hmm. And I think what the industry is actually asking us for is not one or the other, mm-hmm. but the continuum. They want us to develop capability along that entire range from training, because I've met some wonderful, quote, educators who can't develop skills. And I've met some great trainers who can't expand one's thinking, right? Mm-hmm. And so you gotta have both. So I think one thing I would like to see in the industry is in the conversation about training versus education, because it's not that, it's the continuum, and we all need to and understand learning. And frankly, a lot of learning doesn't happen from either of those. Mm-hmm. Most of our learning happens through experience. So let's mm-hmm. grab that.
Yeah, I agree.
And to build on that, learning from experience is to unpack that experience and what did we learn, rather than just assume that we become these wonderful vessels of all this great learning. And at some point we pop it open and we're brilliant. Not the way it happens, right? And I think to Terry's point, it is a continuum. And as educators, we want to make sure that when we're teaching theory, how does it show up in the real world? How does it show up in our practice? And how is it connected? I think about it in the consulting space. When someone attends a session and sees an activity they really like, and they pay attention to what that activity is and how it ran and what the groups were doing, and then they try it out with a group that's different and it doesn't work the same way, and they don't know what to do because they don't have the underpinnings of the theory that created that, then be able to segue, to flex, to move within that space.
I'd like to add, if I may, purely an opinion, I will caveat it as that. I think a lot of what we did in the classroom, particularly around coach training, was quite complex. Depending on the school, depending on the model, depending on who were the educators, but there was a lot of complexity. And I feel that we do better what is the word I'm looking for? Improv, Michelle, improv. We do better to teach simplicity in the online space, particularly. It can be simplicity that's very effective, coaching models that are very effective, but not the layers and layers of complexity. I'm not sure if anybody else has the same opinion or thought or counter thought.
And we welcome the audience to join if you like.
I think for me, I'm at a university that is 100% online, and in talking with colleagues at other universities who are on a campus or learning to be online or whatever, it's the issue of being in love with learning and teaching and being educators who love to engage learners. We seem to, I hate online, I hate Zoom, I hate this, I hate that I had to change, I hate. And I want us to just fall in love with being with our peeps and learning and helping them and educating, whether it's this way or some other way.
Thank you.
I can add something as well.
Hi, Alex.
Hello, everyone. So I understand what Michelle was saying. And in my understanding, this began before the pandemic. So people and companies were looking for shorter and shorter versions of training. So it was not a condition of COVID or we being pandemic, but already the companies were saying, okay, we want very brief, concrete things, tips, and how my leaders can lead in a more coaching approach or something like that, but very, very simple, concrete things. And while I speak for myself, while I was doing this exercise to put it in shorter, it also became simpler. Okay, because instead of wanting to deliver everything and share all the resources and everything, we can put resources apart if people want to explore more. But I think we have to think, okay, what are really the main education, the main things, the main streams that we want to pass along? Just a thought.
Thank you. Other comments? So I think we're getting close to turning into pumpkins. And so I would like to emphasize what I've been seeing in the chat box, and that is what a dynamic and powerful conversation this has been. Hopefully it will continue. It doesn't stop here. I'd like to say Michelle, John, and put them on the spot right now. Is there one resonating comment that you would like to make to the group?
I will, if I may, begin with one resonating comment. In preparation for today's meeting, Charline and her team sent through some questions. And maybe you read some of the questions. One of them is, how do we feel about two-dimensional coaching? And I would like to leave with this parting thought that there is no such thing, in my opinion, as two-dimensional coaching. I don't know what that would be. I thought perhaps I was missing a gap in my knowledge, so I Googled two-dimensional coaching, and a couple of people call their businesses by that name. But this experience of you and I being on screen together, bringing our whole person into the conversation, being fully present, to me is in no way two-dimensional. It is very whole-dimensional.
Thank you, Michelle. I agree.
I thought about kind of a punch here at the end, and punchline, tagline kind of thing. And I have a little acronym, PECS, and not the kind that we build at the gym, but PECS. PECS. And it's for me, this has been a pivot. So we've had the opportunity to shift, not necessarily by our own choice, but that's that disruption that occurs with change. It's also been an opportunity to explore, to discover, to find new ways of doing things, to learn new things about how we do what we do. The importance of communication to all of our constituents, and in terms of learning and growing and sharing ideas. And then the last piece is the sharing. And I think this is so valuable for us as we are engaged in this kind of work, is to continue to find ways of share best practices, leading practices, and sharing challenges as well. So it's great to be with you all today. Thank you, Charline, for putting this together, and Gsaec for sponsoring this. And it's great to be with Michelle and Terry.
Terry, did you want to? Thank you, John. Terry, did you want to?
Yes, certainly. I think two big ideas sort of capture the range of conversations that we've had today. And one is kind of start where the learners are, I think is a really, because oftentimes I think as educators, we so desperately want to help people grow. And that might not even be where they are at that moment. So I think start where the learners are. And then secondly, I think this notion of learning agility is, it was a real mindset shift for me, because until I could envision doing what we did residentially in a virtual environment, I was stuck. So it almost says to me, if you can't imagine it, you can't realize it. So I think imagination is really important. And I think the other shift that I had to make is, you had been doing it this way for 14 years and got a degree of proficiency in that. And so let go of any illusions of perfection or even effectiveness, and do your best to make it as powerful a learning experience as you can, and accept that breakdowns will occur. And what's important is not that there are breakdowns. What's important is how quickly you respond to those breakdowns. And I think once I made that mindset shift, we were able to move. So I think it's so much about, I've heard people often say you can't control the events. You can actually control the way you respond. And I think if there's anything, that is a huge reinforced lesson for me.
Thank you, Terry. And I think to your point, being in the moment to understand what it is we're learning, and to take those disorienting events, as Jack would call them, and turn them into powerful learning opportunities. Maybe it didn't go the way it was supposed to go. Maybe it went better. It just didn't match our plan. I'd like to thank Lori as well for all of her behind the scenes work to make this happen, as well as Tricia Fusellero and Shelby Hoffman. Thank all of our participants who were so engaged and actively using the chat. And to connect with us, we'd like to follow up with you next week with the chat box and answers to your questions. And to do a little bit of PR, on April 22nd, we will have another campfire. And please watch, we will be contacting you, and watch out for the announcement. And then we will build a bonfire in July 22nd and 23rd, and you'll be getting announcements about that. And hopefully you'll consider possibly putting together a presentation, and definitely planning to attend. So I'd like to thank everyone and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.